Facultad de Idiomas Mexicali is happy to have you here listening to this very interesting talk that is training bilingual educators in the United States, the Nevada experience. This talk is presented by Dr. Vanessa Mari. Before we start, I will explain the dynamics of this activity. Dr. Mari will present what she prepared for you today for us. And audience, as you listen, please write your questions and hand them to the students who are kindly helping today, and then I will read the questions to Dr. Mari. Who are our kindly helpers today? So you can ask the favorite writing question, and then they will give them to Professor Jackie, and then she will give them. All right? And then we will listen to the answers Dr. Mari has for the questions. Many alumni are working in the United States, well, not many, but several alumni are working in the United States now. And they really wanted to listen to this talk. Actually, one of them wrote to me that she's on her way here because she wanted to listen to the talk. Others are not able to be here, and that is why we're going to have this talk recorded, and it's going to be available for you to see and check, and you're talking to your friends who want to know more about training bilingual educators in the United States. It's going to be in the YouTube channel of Facultad de Idiomas. Are you happy? Yeah. All right, I will read the survival of Dr. Vanessa Mari. For all of us. Dr. Vanessa Mari started her career teaching English as a second language in a public high school in Puerto Rico. She has also taught in diverse academic settings, including the University of Puerto Rico, Miami, the University of Texas in San Antonio, and the University of Piura and Peru. Dr. Mari has also collaborated with the Ministry of Education in Peru as the English Language Fellow. She currently works for Nevada State University as a professor in the Bilingual Education Program of the School of Education. Please, everybody, welcome Dr. Mari, Vanessa Mari.
Hello, everyone. ¿Me pueden escuchar bien? Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay, perfect. Hi, everyone. Mucho gusto. I wish I could be there, and hopefully I get invited to go in person later. But como dijo la doctora Erika, mi nombre es Vanessa Mari, and I am an associate professor of TESOL at Nevada State University, and that's where I had the pleasure of working with Doctora Erika. I also did a Fulbright scholarship in Uruguay, where I mostly worked with rural English teachers and getting them training on how to teach English. And I did a very similar work in Peru as well as Iraq. But I absolutely loved when I was a fellow because I got to travel to Guadalajara, and I also went to Aguascalientes y la Ciudad de México, y me encantó. And obviously, because I'm in Nevada, I'm so close to like the border that I've gone to Tijuana a couple of times. So hopefully next time I get to go to your university. Y como dijo también la doctora Erika, yo soy de Puerto Rico. I was born and raised in the island, and I'm actually in Puerto Rico right now, which is why I can't go because it's really far. And I've been in Puerto Rico for 6 months working on my sabbatical. And during this time, I've been interviewing Puerto Rican teachers, especially bilingual Puerto Rican teachers that teach English or teach in bilingual schools, because I recognize that when we have bilingual teachers that are Latina and Latino, they bring a lot of value into the bilingual education field. And I really wanted to have an opportunity to work with those teachers specifically, right? And to also shift a little bit the narrative about what it is to have bilingual education in Puerto Rico and also in the United States. And I think the most important thing about who I am and my identity is that I'm a mom of an amazing 4-year-old kid. And I absolutely love being a mother of my child. So I'm very happy that she's here with me too. porque no fue hasta que llegamos a Puerto Rico que empezó a aprender español. So, she now talks a lot of Spanish, and that's super exciting for me. So today I'm going to be talking about bilingual education. But first, I'm going to provide a bit of information on the historical context of bilingual education, the history of bilingual education in the United States, because that really helps us understand why bilingual education is the way that it is right now in the States. I'm also going to talk about the experience in Nevada and in Clark County School District and how bilingual education has grown in the past 8 years. And the third thing I'm going to talk about is the rising demands for the English language learners and the support. I hope that you didn't listen to that music, but there were cars passing. Okay. So a bit about the historical context of bilingual education. Bilingual education started and has existed really in the United States since the 1800s. Now, I think nowadays we think of bilingual education as being something new, like, oh, it's just starting. But the reality is that there's been centuries, it's been a long time since we've had bilingual education. And it started with German language schools. And despite the roots of bilingual education, it is often viewed controversial. And I really think that even this word, the word controversial, is kind of heavy, right? When we think about bilingual education as being something controversial, but that is still the reality. It's something that we are constantly defending, something that we have to explain a lot to people why it is important. Not that people say, for example, oh, being bilingual is not important, but the whole concept of how a bilingual education works is still controversial for many families who choose to put their kids in these schools. But the most important thing really is that it's been going on since the 1800s. And there's a very impactful quote that I think really describes the situation that around bilingual education and immigrants in the United States. And that is from Gandara and Escamilla. They mention how in the United States has historically had an uncomfortable relationship with its immigrants and their languages. And I think this is so important because we are seeing it now. But now it's on our faces. And it wasn't this much on our face. I feel like it's gotten stronger, right? That relationship that the United States has with its immigrants, right? And their languages. And that part of language is very important because language is highly political. And that's why when we look at the relationship between language policies that are passing and bilingual education, we have to see who it is attached and who it represents because it is connected, right? So, I remember when I first went to Las Vegas, like many people that go to Las Vegas for the first time, you're going to go to the strip, right? To gamble, to have fun, to go eat. And I remember I went for an anniversary. Oh my goodness, it was a long time ago, like over 10 years ago, the first time I ever went to Vegas before I actually lived there. And one of the places that I stopped was at the Mob Museum. El Museo de la Mafia. And of course, out of all places, Las Vegas is going to have a mob museum. But Las Vegas was founded, a lot of it was founded by the mob, by the mafia. And in that museum, I remember walking in expecting to learn a lot about the mob, and I did, but I also learned a lot about immigration. I also learned a lot about Italian immigration, about the Jewish immigration in the United States, and how they were perceived, right? So we see the cycle of how we look at new immigrants coming into the United States and how that language is politicized, right? So the next slide that I have here, I actually have two pictures of two places that I've been to in the United States that kind of look like you're at a different place, right? They don't look like your typical what you typically imagine as being part of the US. And the first picture is a street in New Orleans, and I had the best time there with Dra. Erika. We had a great time at the NABIC conference. But the first picture is New Orleans, and one thing that you notice, like from the structure, for example, and when you go to New Orleans, is that has such deep French roots, right? It's a place where you can still feel and see the language. You can see the linguistic landscape. You can see the street signs in French, the food, the name of things. It's deeply rooted in French. However, people there don't speak that language anymore. It's been lost, right? And on the other side, I have Fredericksburg. And I learned about Fredericksburg when I lived in Texas because I was living in Texas in my mid-20s and someone told me there's a really good winery in Texas in Fredericksburg. So of course I had to go to Fredericksburg, and it is in wine country, Texas. And Fredericksburg, just in the name, you can see that it is founded by Germans. And in Fredericksburg, it's the same thing as New Orleans, but with a German spin. You have German restaurants. There used to be newspapers printed in German in Fredericksburg, but now the language there is no longer German. People don't speak that there anymore. And the reason I'm showing these two places is because from the landscape, what we call the linguistic landscape, you can see that other languages were spoken there, and it was founded by people that spoke other languages. So prior to that European colonization, there were approximately 300 indigenous languages spoken on the land known as the United States. That's a lot of languages, right? Over 300 languages. And when you think about it now, in our world, there's close to 7,000 languages spoken. But the reality is that almost half of all these languages have fallen victim to linguicide. Now, linguicide is the deliberate destruction of a language or the forced loss of a language by a group of people. Now, this here is very important because it's talking about deliberate destruction of the language. And that happened with the boarding schools for Native Indigenous people in the United States, where kids were literally ripped from their parents and the language was violently taken from them, right? So that they would only speak English. And there's many documented cases of children not being able to talk the language of their parents. But what we're seeing here with this deliberate destruction of a language and the forced loss of a language by a group of people is that this is something that is still happening, right? The language loss is happening because of the dynamic of power and language. And this is where bilingual education really comes in, right? Because bilingual education is meant to sustain the language of the community and add another language. So I think that's very important because when we think about bilingual education, we tend to think about it from the lens of teaching Spanish and English, but it really is honed and developed to represent the communities and the languages spoken within those communities. So another thing that I wanted to note, I'm going to send this PowerPoint to Dra. Erika, and all the things are linked here. So once you have it, you're able to open the full-length articles that I chose information to highlight here. So today, there's approximately 167 indigenous languages spoken in the US from the 300, right? We're down to 167. And this is already very troubling because what happens when we lose a language is that we are losing a culture, we are losing a wealth of knowledge, we are losing people, we're losing identities, right? I think a lot of people tend to think about it, well, if we are one nation and one language, we can communicate better. But the reality is that that really limits the diversity and the different ways of knowing. Because with the language also comes a way of knowing, a way of thinking, and a way of speaking, right? I like to give the analogy of a zoo. Imagine that you're going to a zoo and there's over 300 types of tigers. And that's the only thing that you see. It's just a bunch of tigers, right? There's no diversity. And that you can already see how that's troubling when you don't have the diversity of different species. The diversity of different languages is very important. So what we're seeing right now is that in the US, it is estimated that only 20 languages will remain by 2050. That is a huge decline, right? We started at over 300, and by 2050, which is just around the corner, it's going to go down to 20 languages. Navajo is the most spoken Native American language with nearly around 170,000 speakers left. So there needs to be, if we really are serious about sustaining languages, which is deeply rooted in the core of bilingual education, we need to be thinking about how we can help these languages through bilingual education so that it is additive and not subtractive. Because a lot of times education in the United States, the way that our schools are formed is to have that subtractive method, where you're going in bilingual, but you're leaving monolingual. Now, there's a couple of things here that I wanted you to notice, right? And the first thing is the map here on the left. And you can see from the different states that the darker states is where there's a denser population of students that are English learners, considered English learners, right? And for example, you can see that California and Nevada and Colorado are one of the darker colors, as well as Texas and New Mexico. These are darker colors because there's a higher concentration of English learners. So in my argument is that when you're looking at places like these, right, that has a high number of English learners, what we need to see is what are the support systems for these English learners so that they can learn English, but they also keep their native language. So in Texas and in New Mexico and in California, there's a long history of bilingual education, and Nevada has recently joined that conversation, let's say. So on the other side, though, you can see what are the language characteristics of English learners. And this is the number and percentage distribution of English learners in public schools. So you can see the home language. And the home language in the United States, the most represented one is Spanish. And the percentage distribution is around 76% of all English learners in the United States are Spanish speakers. And that is a percent of about 8 to 10% of all students in public schools in the United States are Spanish speakers. Now, I think that is a significant number of students, right, that need a support. But we also have to think, and that's another thing about bilingual education, when we frame bilingual education, we also have to frame it as a way to support students that are native speakers of another language and the native speakers of English. So then we have Arabic, then we have Chinese, Vietnamese, Portuguese, Russian, etc. But in the case of Nevada, we really are seeing a bigger demographic of English learners that are Spanish speakers and Tagalog speakers, because Nevada is also jokingly called the eighth island. I think it's the eighth. Well, yeah, it's called one of the islands of Hawaii. We have a lot of people from Hawaii moving to the ninth island. Oh, I just remembered the ninth island. It's also known as the ninth island because there's a lot of people coming in from Hawaii, but also Tagalog speakers that are coming into Nevada. So those are our two personal languages mostly represented in our communities. So I also think it's important when we're talking about bilingual education in that national context to look at what's happening right now and the conversations that are happening around language use in the United States, right? President Trump back in March signed an executive order that said that English is now the official language. This is a first in the United States history because we did not have an official language, but President Trump said that, right? And what he's saying essentially is following that idea of one nation, one language, and also the subversive idea of if you live in the United States, you got to learn English, right? So what this order does is that it allows the government agencies and also the organizations that receive federal funding to choose whether to continue to offer documents and services in languages other than English. Okay, so they can choose whether to continue doing this. And this move also resigns the mandate from former President Bill Clinton that required that the government and organizations that receive federal funding to provide language assistance to non-English speakers. Now, this is highly problematic as well, right? Because we want to make sure that anything that has to do with information giving is accessible for people. But what they're saying essentially is that's not necessarily the case anymore. And from the White House, it says that establishing English as the official language will not only streamline communication, but also reinforce shared national values and create a more cohesive and efficient society. Now, I think that this statement is completely inaccurate, right? Because we're not streamlining communication, we're doing the opposite. We're not helping people understand the information, right? It's the reinforcing shared national values. It's essentially saying that English has more value than any other language. And to create a more cohesive and efficient society, that's also false, right? Because it doesn't matter if you are a speaker of another language, it doesn't impact this, right? There's no research that says that it impacts this. But what they're trying to say is to remove people and remove languages that don't fit what they want to see. And another thing that has happened recently is that a lot of offices, like for example, right now they want to dismantle the Department of Education. They've already dismantled the Office of English Language Acquisition. And the Office of English Language Acquisition, a lot of the people were let go. Me and my colleague received a grant from the Office of English Language Acquisition, a federal grant meant to support early childhood multilingual students. And now even those grants are being put on the line, right? Because it's no longer seen as value given to President Trump's agenda. So all of this is to say that what we are seeing right now in the national context, it really is targeting programs like bilingual education. And we have to acknowledge that that is what is happening to be able to find other ways to support these programs. So the historical framing as well of bilingual education. Bilingual education emerged during the civil rights era as a response to the exclusion of Latinx communities, Latina communities, right? A lot of students were excluded. They could not participate in school because if you don't understand the language, you can't really participate in the school. The early programs aimed to instill cultural pride and improve self-esteem. And I think here, what we're seeing is that important part of the early programs, right? At the beginning of bilingual education, one of the goals was the cultural pride and improve self-esteem. However, these programs were often marginalized and located in the basements of schools, symbolizing their subordinate status. So for a lot of schools, there's this really good podcast that talks about just that, right? How bilingual programs, so not the whole school isn't following a bilingual curriculum, but the few classrooms that are following the bilingual curriculum, they were located in the basements of the classrooms, right? Of the school, like they weren't located in the best places because the students were othered. But we're seeing then the federal support with the Bilingual Education Act that focus on psychological remediation rather than addressing the structural inequalities that were happening within this. So with these rising demands of English for English learner support, we see that a 60% of increase of English learners in pre-K to 12 over the past decade. That means that a huge increase, right, of these students that are learning other languages. But yet our educational system is lagging on adapting to all of their needs. When we look also at the benefits for supporting these programs, and I think many of us, right, that are teaching in bilingual schools or are bilingual ourselves know about these benefits. But these are the benefits that we need to be able to advocate and explain to other people because it is oftentimes not understood. What we see a lot in the classrooms in Nevada and just in a lot of places, right, is that the parents are the ones that hesitate putting their kiddos in bilingual schools because they think either their child's going to get confused, which we know is a huge misconception about bilingual education, about bilingual people. They think, well, English is the language of power, so why should I have my kid exposed to their native language? And we see this often, right? Abuelitos que ya no se pueden comunicar con sus nietos because they lose that language. So it is important for us to talk about these benefits and how they impact bilingual education and our kiddos. So we look at the academic achievement. Bilingual education boosts the academic achievement of in all areas, right? In all content areas. It's not just helping kids be bilingual. They're also learning how to do math in Spanish and English, right? That means that you are being exposed to a concept in two languages. So you're growing and you're expanding your conocimiento usando dos idiomas. Also, maintaining that cultural identity, which is so important because for a lot of our kiddos, they live on what we call the third space, right? Ese tercer lugar, que no soy de aquí ni soy de allá. Y that's, for example, algo que le está pasando a mi hija. Mi hija tiene 4 años, está creciendo en Nevada, dos padres puertorriqueños, pero se le hace difícil aprender el español porque no hay muchas escuelas bilingües, right? So then, when we come to places like Puerto Rico y la escuchan hablando inglés, ella no es puertorriqueña. But when we go to places like Nevada, where she doesn't look white, then it's, well, she's not from here either. So it's that third space. And that's why it really is important to have the bilingual programs because it helps those kiddos fill the cultural identity. And at least I'm happy to report my child is speaking Spanish, ya está aprendiendo español, but a lot of it is because we're here, estamos aquí, estamos immersed in Spanish en la isla. And also it fosters that cognitive flexibility because the kids now can talk to you and explain the same concept in multiple ways. And when we're teaching a language, we're also teaching a different ways of looking and analyzing things. No es de la misma forma, ¿verdad? Because as Spanish speakers, we view the world and we communicate with each other in a different way than English. ¿Ustedes escuchan esa música? ¿No? ¿No lo escuchan? Ok, porque el vecino mío prendió reggaetón hasta ahora, and I'm like, oh my gosh. En todo momento, he chose now. Okay. Students in bilingual programs also outperform peers in English-only settings. And this is so important, right? Because this is the data that we need to look at. Students in bilingual programs outperform peers in English only. So they're outperforming standardized academic tests in all content areas. Research is also indicating that dual language programs improve proficiency for English learners and help native English speakers become bilingual. So that's the other way that we have to frame it now as well, because a lot of people think, well, bilingual education is for the kiddos that don't know English, but really is to help both demographics. The students are English speakers and the students that are, for example, Spanish speaker, grow both their languages. So it helps both demographics. And what I'm seeing in Nevada, and I'll show you some pictures, is just that. It's the growth of both languages. Students are also showing, studies have shown students in dual language programs are 7 to 9 months ahead in reading by middle school. right? Because now they can read in two languages and they can process the information. And we know, and we are teaching students another language, if they have a strong foundation of literacy in their native language, that's going to go to their second language, right? So it's important for me to do a very strong and to build, right, as bilingual teachers, a strong foundation in Spanish literacy so that it transfers to English literacy. And bilingualism also offers cognitive benefits and better academic outcomes. So that's what I always like to tell our parents, right? So a bit more information on the context of Nevada. So our population in Nevada, you saw that we were one of the darker blue um, little hexagons on the map. We have the population is twice the national average, right? In Nevada, our English learners population is twice what the national average is. So although our English learners represent about 10% of school population at the national level, they represent approximately double that figure in the state of Nevada, which ranks fourth in the number of K-12 English students. That's big, right? We are fourth in the nation of the number of English learners. And given the high number of English learners in Nevada, there was a critical need to address their academic achievement. And the best way that we can do that is by providing them with a bilingual education. Yet, only two schools in Clark County, which is CCSD, and CCSD, Clark County School District, the one is the fifth largest school district in the United States. It is huge. It expands from Las Vegas, Henderson, Mesquite, all the way down to south. It is a huge district, right? But in this really big district, when we look at public bilingual education, the number is low. There's two public schools in Las Vegas that offer bilingual education. And there is one high school. The two public schools are elementary public schools. And then there's one high school that offers some classes following a bilingual dual language model. So like I mentioned, CCSD is the fifth largest US school district, which means it's really, really big. I think Puerto Rico is considered the sixth or seventh. So Puerto Rico is also huge, right? But our school district here in Puerto Rico is the whole island. In Nevada is a huge desert, right? Uno está en Las Vegas, and then if you go up to Reno, it's 8 hours just of desert landscape. So the district really, the CCSD is huge. It takes up basically the South. 16% of the students are classified as English learners, and despite these, only 3 schools offer dual language. The public school that I mentioned, and the high school that I mentioned, and the 2 elementary schools that I mentioned. I think it is also important to note that there are some private schools that are popping up now, right? So they're popping up in the private sector, like as charter schools. There's like 2 charter schools that are bilingual, and a charter school is basically school that is privately run but uses public funding. So that's the most general way of explaining what a charter school is in case they're not as common there. But what we're seeing now is that the few bilingual schools that are in CCSD in Las Vegas, they are growing. And these schools too are relatively new. I think the programs in those schools have been there for maybe 3 years now. So it's very new as well. I've been in Las Vegas for 8 years, going on 9. And I remember starting in the district coming from Texas, donde hay un movimiento bien grande de educación bilingüe, coming from Puerto Rico, donde hay muchísimas escuelas bilingües también, a ir a Nevada y mudarme a Nevada y a ver 0 escuelas bilingües, right? So I've worked with the district, and I've worked with some of the principals and the teachers to provide them the licensure requirement to meet the needs of those English learners and to start the bilingual schools. So that's right now the state, right? We don't have as many, but it is growing. At least it's growing. And I hope we by the time I retire, there's gonna be dozens and dozens of schools. So English learners in grades 3 to 5 have shown in these schools, in the bilingual schools that we're looking at, they have shown a 17.5% reading proficiency rate compared to 40% for native speakers. In grades 6 to 8, English learners' reading proficiency drops to 5.1 versus a 37% overall, and only 7.1 of English learners demonstrate proficiency on the English language proficiency test. Now, this is the data of the public schools, right? Not the dual language schools. But what we're seeing, though, is that this is a very low number, right? Only 7% are demonstrating proficiency in English language proficiency assessments. That's a low number, and we need to work on providing the students more support so that they're able to get up to the standard, right? And we're noticing that the students that are in the bilingual schools are getting up to that at a quicker pace. So the way that we are meeting the needs of bilingual education that I have at least been able to do my part in is in the teacher preparation. And the teacher preparation, right? I remember como 7 años atrás, I was meeting with the superintendent of the English Language Learner Division. Entonces, la pregunta siempre era, but what comes first, the chicken or the eggs? ¿Qué viene primero? ¿Las escuelas bilingües o el programa de preparación de maestros para escuelas bilingües? That was the question. So I remember thinking, well, I can start a program for preparing bilingual education teachers, and I did. We started, and at Nevada State University is the only university that provides a degree in elementary education with a bilingual concentration. So we are the only place in Nevada where a teacher can go and get licensed, get the credits needed to become licensed by the state, to get their bilingual license. So Nevada State offers the state's only bilingual endorsement, and the courses include assessment, curriculum design, and instruction in Spanish. So these are the courses that we offer, for example, that meet the state licensing requirements. So we have curriculum development and methodology in content areas for bilingual education. So this course helps teachers develop curriculum and develop methodology. This course is taught in Spanish because what we are noticing when we have teachers coming in es que y no me sorprende, ¿verdad? Pero muchas maestras bilingües o muchas personas que son bilingües tienen mucha duda de su propio conocimiento de español, ¿verdad? Because they didn't go to a school that was bilingual. So they come in to my university saying, yo sé español, pero yo no sé si lo sé tan bien, ¿verdad? O yo no sé si lo tengo como para el nivel académico para poder dar clases. So we embedded a lot of Spanish in our courses to make sure that the teachers really just build their Spanish literacy, but also their confidence, right? Because a lot of times yo le tengo que decir a la maestra, tú tienes el conocimiento, lo que no tienes es la confianza, right? That you know the Spanish. So we build their Spanish throughout these classes. We also have assessment and evaluation for bilingual learners, where we discuss the impact of assessments of standardized testing on English learners, but we also talk about how we can develop assessments that are fair for bilingual students. How do we assess content knowledge, but also assess their Spanish and their English proficiency? Como tú, como maestra de español, das un examen, ¿verdad? O alguna prueba o algún tipo de assessment que pueda medir su conocimiento de la tarea, del contenido en español y en inglés. We also look at language curriculum design and evaluation in bilingual education. This is done in Spanish and English. And we also do curriculum development and methodology in literacy for bilingual education. And this course is taught in Spanish. Now, I have a picture here of one of my student teachers que se graduó este año. Y Doctora Erika, maybe you gave her class. I think you did a Cynthia. Cynthia was on the newspaper this year as she taught a class at Lake Elementary School, one of the dual language schools, and she was highlighting the progress of the dual language schools in Nevada. So it was super exciting to see a Cynthia in El Periódico that really started highlighting for the first time since I've been there what bilingual education is doing for our state. So the 3 public schools that are bilingual, right? And the 5 private schools that are offering bilingual curriculum. And the 5 private schools, like I mentioned, are charters, and they are all doing Spanish, except one school that's doing Mandarin education. And the other good thing that happened recently in our state for supporting bilingual education is that the principal of one of our bilingual schools got elected. So she is passing a Senate Bill, Senate Bill 115, and this is in relation to education. So this is but essentially what this Senate bill, if it passes, what it's doing is that it's going to provide a stipend for teachers who teach pupils enrolled in a program of bilingual education. Now, this is huge as well because what this is saying is if you are a bilingual teacher, you're going to get paid more. Right? Ese no ha sido el caso. Con las escuelas bilingües que tenemos ahora, una maestra que está licenciada como maestra bilingüe está ganando lo mismo que otra maestra que tiene una licencia, por ejemplo, solamente en elementary education. But for the first time, we are talking about paying the teachers more. And that is the standard in every other state I've looked at. In Texas, they give you a $5,000 signing bonus to work at a dual language school. They pay you a lot more to have your bilingual licensure. They do the same in California. They do the same in Utah. But in Nevada, the 5th largest school district with the 4th largest percentage of English learners, bilingual education is still new. Okay, so even though it has existed in the United States for centuries, in Nevada, it's 3 years old, even though I feel like I've been talking about it for almost a decade. And this Senate bill, too, is going to adopt regulations requiring teachers to hold an endorsement to teach pupils enrolled in the program of bilingual education. So essentially, lo que le está diciendo a las maestras es, si tú quieres trabajar en una escuela bilingüe, tienes que tener tu licenciatura de maestra bilingüe. And to get your license, you have to take the courses that I mentioned, the 4 courses that I mentioned, and also pass a Spanish proficiency test. So you have to pass a standardized test in Spanish that measures your knowledge of Spanish. But I was very excited to see the Senate bill because for the first time we're talking about paying teachers, right? Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to mention, right, there's a great article and I have it linked here that's talking about from basements to boutiques, right? So I referenced it a little bit at the beginning, going from the basements to the boutique model. And you can see that happening in Nevada, but you can also see it happening in a lot of other places. Piensa en cuántas escuelas públicas bilingües hay versus cuántas escuelas privadas bilingües hay, ¿verdad? Las escuelas privadas bilingües son bien lucrativas, hay que pagar muchísimo dinero para esas escuelas y son ahora la mayoría en muchísimos lugares que las escuelas públicas, right? So bilingual education now, we're seeing that it's going to a for-profit model. And even I encountered that in Nevada when I was looking for a bilingual school for my child que estuviera cerca de mi casa. Fui a una escuela bilingüe privada cerca de mi casa, le fui a dar un tour y salí de allí con el corazón en la garganta, porque era tan cara. I was like, no se puede, ¿verdad? But we are seeing a rise of dual language education or two-way immersions programs that are now aimed at white middle-class families, when the true purpose of a bilingual program was to really serve the communities of color and to serve the communities that speak other languages. But now we're seeing a rise to it be something more profitable and for profit and for people que pueden lucrarse de eso, ¿verdad? The focus has shifted from serving the marginalized students to marketing bilingualism as a global asset. Y eso en todos lugares en Las Vegas lo dicen, ¿verdad? Ay, es que el bilingüismo aquí, como somos una ciudad de turismo, súper importante, ¿verdad? Pero we're not doing enough to support the programs. And we're also looking at the neoliberal multiculturalism that turned bilingual education into a commodified product, reducing the civil rights roots, right? It's something commodified. It's a product now that you can purchase, that you can pay for. Y aquí en Puerto Rico está pasando también. Las escuelas públicas bilingües son pocas, pero las escuelas privadas bilingües por montones, ¿verdad? Por montones. Muchísimas, muchísimas. So I want you to think about it, right? To think about who has access to bilingual education in your context. ¿Quiénes son los estudiantes que pueden pagar o pueden access a ese tipo de educación? Okay, so that's a question for you to think about. I know I'm running a little bit out of time, so I want to just finish the conclusion. CCSD, our school district, is facing significant challenges in supporting English learners due to the limited dual language program and resources constraints. So we have a lot of less students. We don't have the resource, right, to support these programs. Investing in bilingual education and teacher training can bridge that proficiency gap that we're seeing. So we need to invest more on teacher training so that the teachers que ya son bilingües, que están trabajando en el distrito, vayan a coger los cursos que le añaden la licencia. And we also need to embrace dual language programs that can lead to better academic outcomes and inclusivity for all students. And I think this is the important part, right? The academic outcome and the inclusivity part of it, because it is a program designed to be inclusive for all languages, for all students, for students that have disabilities, for students that need support and more language support in their classes and in their content. ¿Verdad? Porque sentarse en un salón de clase a escuchar todo en inglés sin ningún tipo de language support is just going to cause a lot of frustration for our students. And also, we need to change our mindset that our schools are only producing English speakers. Porque la realidad es que cuando uno mira alrededor del mundo, ser bilingüe es lo común. Pero uno mira a Estados Unidos, donde ser monolingüe es lo común y es lo que es socialmente aceptable, ¿verdad? Pero uno va a cualquier otra parte del mundo y la gente está hablando 2 o 3 idiomas, o muchos más, son multilingües. So we really need to shift that mindset that just being a monolingual English speaker is better than having that inclusive language. Okay, so I am going to open to see if there's any questions, pero si tienen alguna pregunta después, puse mi email allí, and me pueden mandar un email en cualquier momento, and I'm happy to have any conversations and answer your questions online. Okay, ya, voy a respirar. ¿Tienen alguna pregunta?
Sí, can you hear me? Okay. One question said, do you think bilingual education would have more support in the future?
I think I want to be optimistic and say yes, but if I am being honest, when we're looking at the policies that we are going to have to endure for the next 4 years with our current president, no. I don't think there's going to be a lot of support. When we're looking at the deliberate dismantling of these programs and the dismantling of the funding that support these programs. So as much as I want to say yes, I also think that we are going to have to become even stronger advocates to keep these programs. So I think people are starting to see the value. Well, I think people see the value of it. I just don't think our current administration is putting the money needed for that right now.
Another question. How do you deal or try to deal with the third space, with people telling others that they are not from here or not from there?
Eso es algo sumamente difícil, ¿verdad? It's something that I think bilingual education, with it having that bicultural component, really helps students fill that gap, ¿verdad? Porque pasa muchísimo, estoy seguro que ustedes, pero una de mis mejores amigas es chicana, and then she experiences that too, right? Feeling like que no es aceptada en México porque su español no aprendió el español bien, ¿verdad? Porque se crió en Estados Unidos, pero sus padres son mexicanos, right? So dealing with that third space, it really we have to think about how socially and culturally we're shifting to be more inclusive of how people look like and sound like within our communities. But the language that we speak is the first identity marker, ¿verdad? That's the first thing that we make judgments based out on people, the way that they look and the way that they speak. So they can look a certain way, pero abren la boca y ya, y a mí me lo han dicho muchísimas veces también, ¿verdad? People can tell me, oh, you look, que parece que eres de Estados Unidos, pero empiezas a hablar y se te nota el acento. Those types of commentary, there really are microaggressions, right? And there's very little we can do except like stand up for ourselves.
What is the biggest difference between teaching in the US and teaching in Latin America that you have experienced?
Yeah, hay muchísimas diferencias, ¿verdad? Y una que voy a decir, una diferencia que hay has to do a lot with the community-based models that we have for education. And one of the things that, por ejemplo, talking about here being in Puerto Rico, the teacher almost feels like I'm leaving my little one with her abuelita o con su tía. It's a lot more community and family oriented than I think it is in other places because the United States is an individualistic society. If you want to do well, you have to work hard enough, ¿verdad? Si tú trabajas lo suficientemente fuerte, tú puedes hacer lo que quieras. That's not really a cultural mentality that we have in Latin America, where we really work as a community to uplift each other. So that's one of the major things that I've seen. Entonces también yo diría, le dicen como enseñar con cariño. Esa parte todavía está acá, no está tan separado. Um, hay como que ese cariño y ese ambiente familiar.
Yeah. What is the best tip for us to be successful like you?
Oh, I don't think I understood the question. What is the best what?
The best tip, advice that you have for us to be as successful as you are.
Oh, that's a great, okay. So let's see. I think the tip that I would have is, um, so much of the knowledge that I gained and so much of the opportunities that I've had is because I worked as a teacher. Yo estaba en el salón de clases. Yo tuve esa experiencia de dar clases en secundaria. Yo daba clases a los niños de secundaria aquí en Puerto Rico. That is extremely important. And also the other thing is to look for opportunities when they're offered, right? And to ask also for opportunities. One of the things that I think in our field of education, you really stand out when you make your voice heard. So make your name known by either writing articles para el periódico, writing research, collaborating with some of your professors that are writing research right now and asking them, what are you working on and how can I help? Because you want to learn how to do that yourself, right? And then when you already have that teacher and that research brain on, when you go into the classroom, you're collecting data that you can use to not only improve your teaching, but to write and to support other teachers. And once you're doing that, people start knowing about your work and your voice, and you can add a lot of value. So don't only consume information, no tan solo consumas información sobre educación, produce. Y produce para que la gente aprenda. And it's okay if we start with smaller numbers, but produce, not only consume information.
Another question, do you think it's advisable to have a subject about multiculturalism when people start learning English?
Okay, let me see. If I think it's possible, and then I miss a little bit because of the echo. No te escucho bien.
Do you think it is advisable to have a subject about multiculturalism when people are starting learning English?
I think If it is possible to study projects of multiculturalism when people are starting to learn English? Is that the question?
Yeah, if there should be a class or it should be included about multiculturalism when people are just.
Oh, for sure, right? For sure. Because as bilingual teachers, bilingualism and biculturalism are tied. No somos nada más maestras del lenguaje. Con un lenguaje enseñamos una cultura, ¿verdad? They come together. So we have to also be thinking about the cultural aspects of bilingual education and thinking about it from not only what surface culture is, no tan solo lo que se ve por encima, pero también lo que significa la cultura para las personas. Y a lo que me refiero con eso es que muchas veces we think about culture as a performance. I think about it, ¿verdad? We might think about, well, let's celebrate with food. Let's celebrate by dressing up like this. Let's celebrate by the major holidays. But really, it's a culture, is a way of thinking and doing and acting. We as a community, we as teachers of bilingual education, we're also teaching the nitty-gritty of the culture of our language.
Thank you, Dr. Vanessa. We're running out of time. So I'm going to read a document that we always give send out to our presenters. So, Universidad Autónoma de Baja California, Facultad de Idiomas Mexicali, otorga la presente constancia a la doctora Vanessa Mari por impartir la conferencia Training Bilingual Teachers in the USA en Nevada State. En el marco de la Semana de la Docencia llevada a cabo del 12 al 16 de mayo en las instalaciones de la Facultad de Idiomas Mexicali, Baja California, 12 de mayo del 2025, por la realización plena del ser, firma nuestro director, el doctor Rafael Saldívar Arriola.
Muchas gracias a todos y todas.